I signed historic executive order strengthening civil rights protections for... He's running from me. I don't know where he's going. Do that again, man. You're a sprinter. You're gonna... I don't know. He's running to something or from something. I don't know.
The 2024 Republican presidential primary field is taking shape.
The battle lines are becoming clearer, and so is the field of candidates.
Is the odds-on favorites, if you look at the polling, still Trump versus Biden?
That seems to be it, but it's just way too early to tell.
I'm more angry now, and I'm more committed now than I ever was.
Big challenge for these candidates is going to be how do they navigate Donald Trump? And how do they navigate Ron DeSantis?
You and I have a rendezvous with them.
Welcome back to the Ruthless Variety Program, fellas. It is an awfully big week in the world of politics.
It seems like we've been having a lot of those lately.
Holy smokes, one after another. That was, incidentally, the President of the United States at his, what was it, like a pride party?
I think it was a pride event.
A pride event in the back, like the South Lawn.
And again, you know, the guy who has the nuclear codes basically just starts saying an assortment of words. And the audience, I love how in the background you can hear the audience just starts like faintly laughing, like...
They're like,
like, oh, well.
He's lost his train of thought again.
So I didn't see that clip. I assume somebody is running.
Nobody was apparent in the screen, in the shot that was provided. There was
He's just like squirrel.
Yeah, it was just like something caught his eye.
Oh.
Right.
I mean, I guess it's better than when he was like, "Where's Jackie?" You know, like that was pretty bad. We're hoping whoever that person was, maybe that he saw is at least alive and real.
Yeah, it was incidentally, it was also the place that he said this was the most brave, courageous, I think was his word, assembled group that he'd seen in quite some time. I think the day before he had addressed the Air Force Academy, and then a week prior to that was at a Memorial Day discussion, which I think would be arguable to say the least.
I mean, well, sure. I mean, there's something to be said about our World War II vets, but come on, dude. It's not their month.
Doesn't anybody have the reins?
They picked the wrong month, man. Ike should have been like, listen, June's Pride Month. We're going to have to move our heroes to another month.
But what would be the reaction if you took a knee in front of the pride flag?
Oh, interesting thought.
Stunning and brave.
You know?
Well, I know they have quite a problem with it when it burns, unlike the American flag.
Yeah, I mean,
it becomes a huge problem.
I'm just saying,
it's a hate crime.
You got a lot of political crosswinds there. Everyone would be confused
if you took a knee. I noticed that the pride flag was in the middle of the South Lawn, like the big pillars in the back.
Yeah.
Columns, and there was two American flags on the side, and the pride flag right there in the middle.
Yeah.
Which I think offended quite a few of our veterans, including the Wolf. I think the Wolf, I noticed, was on Twitter. I didn't care for it.
No.
Which is understandable.
And the Wolf is, he's just outdoing himself every week.
He is.
Now he is managing the board because our friend John Ashbrook just decided to not show up for the episode.
Which is amazing because I didn't know coming into today, we had a distinguished guest on our program, Congressman Brad Wenstrup.
Amazing guest. Great guest.
Who's not only a great guest and can talk about a bunch of different things that we go into. He's having a hearing with Rochelle Walensky of the CDC, ask a bunch of really tough questions about the handling of coronavirus. So it's interesting, but he's from Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And Ashbrook didn't show. So
it's a bad look.
I've told you about this guy. Ashbrook, you never know.
You never know. It's a real problem. No heads up. So we're off on our own here. I shall say that our YouTube page has been quite a success, fellas.
Yeah, and we're starting to put full episodes and extra little shorts on there, little treats like King of the Hill was on there.
King of the Hill was on there. If you haven't seen that, you should go. While you're there, please like and subscribe because that's important.
Also, the comments people have been leaving are some of the nicest things. I've been telling the guys since we launched this YouTube that if you want to feel good about life, go check out the comments people are leaving for us. They're the best listeners in the world.
This is how Smug sustains himself at night.
Yeah.
Well, this is how it starts. And then the thing gets big and they get real nasty, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, I don't care. So
No.
Say mean things, say nice things. I prefer nice things.
Prefer nice things, but I could take some mean things.
Yeah.
Well, it shows engagement.
Well, yeah.
If there weren't people that actually hated us, we wouldn't be doing our job.
Well, and I'm sustained by rage, so...
No, but seriously, go check that out if you haven't yet. It is actually an incredible page, and there's a bunch of really good content on it. And you can kind of see behind the scenes how we have fun with all of this stuff, which is, I mean, to the extent that interests you, YouTube it is. In the meantime, fellas, we got a big week. As we speak and as you're hearing us, we are in the hours here before Donald J. Trump will be turning himself in at a Miami courtroom for an arraignment on charges that were brought last week by the Department of Justice alleging a whole bunch of stuff. I think we did a nice job in the special episode of laying out the equities that we were discussing without having seen the charges at that point.
Right.
And then the charges came out. Mm-hmm. And much more, I would say, a much better source to describe that kind of thing than the three of us, as smart as you all are. I look for conservative attorneys, right? Mm-hmm. So I look for what Andy McCarthy was saying on National Review. Bill Barr had an appearance on Fox News Sunday that I thought was sort of instructive about what this kind of thing is. Because, inherently when you're dealing with Trump or any political leader, you're dealing with political arguments and political discussions. And too often, in my view, it becomes a political statement rather than having any understanding what it is that we're dealing with here.
Right, and I think people are well versed in the playbook that the left has used on Donald Trump for all these last years. And whenever you read a media report, you got to take it with a huge grain of salt, right? Yeah. Until you see what actually is there in, a legal indictment, not characterized by a journalist who's, you go back to Russiagate, all of this stuff was fake, and it was all characterized by journalists who said that they had sources, and so, the proof is always in the pudding.
Yeah, so we're conditioned in terms of the press characterization and the political argument to be sort of skeptical about all of it. But as I said with the two aforementioned guys, and then the one that I've actually really been looking for here is somebody who testified on Donald Trump's behalf at an impeachment hearing, Jonathan Turley, who's I think a really highly regarded, not typically considered a conservative legal mind up until sort of the last few years, but he's certainly a legal mind that people pay a lot of attention to. He had a Fox News appearance that I thought was particularly instructive last Friday. Maybe we can play that.
It is an extremely damning indictment. There are indictments that are sometimes called narrative or speaking indictments. These are indictments that are really meant to make a point as to the depth of the evidence. There are some indictments that are just bare bones. This is not. The special counsel knew that there would be a lot of people who were going to allege that the Department of Justice was acting in a biased or politically motivated way. This is clearly an indictment that was drafted to answer those questions. It's overwhelming in details. And, the Trump team should not fool itself. These are hits below the waterline. These are witnesses who apparently testified under oath, gave statements to federal investigators, both of which can be criminally charged if they're false. Those witnesses are directly quoting the president in encouraging others not to look for documents or allegedly to conceal them. It's damaging. And the key here to keep in mind is that every case I've ever been involved with, the indictment was a heart stopper. These are written by lawyers who are trying to convict a client. Every indictment I've ever dealt with has fallen apart to some degree once we look more carefully at what the evidence may be. But this is not an indictment that you can dismiss. There are a lot of people who are testifying under oath, and they're saying highly incriminating things.
So, look, I mean, that puts a little bit of pause to things, considering where Jonathan Turley has been on things like the New York indictment, for example, which he thought was incredibly ridiculous. The civil verdict that they had in New York on Trump, which he thought it was absurd, and 2 impeachment trials, which he thought were completely insane. This is a very different characterization of what he's dealing with here.
Yeah, I think, number one, having read the whole indictment, and look, I mean, you got to see what defense Donald Trump is going to have for this stuff, obviously, and that's the big caveat. But the thing that really struck me, there's been a lot of back and forth on Presidential Records Act and all this sort of stuff of classifications and all that. I think you had said previously when we did the emergency podcast episode that what Andrew McCarthy had said was like, that's kind of a red herring. And I agree a lot more now that I read the indictment, because I think the thing that is really damaging in that, and I think that's sort of what's alluded to there in that audio we just heard, is there is a account, minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day. Donald Trump has served this subpoena for the documents, meets with his attorneys. They set up a timeline for the attorney to come back and review the classified material in those bankers' boxes. We've all now seen the photos everywhere. And then there are periods of time over the course of a couple of days in which Donald Trump has communication with that Will Nada, who's also indicted.
Yeah, this poor guy who's the assistant to the president.
And the claim in the indictment is that at Trump's direction, Nada removed boxes from that storage room without the knowledge of the attorney that was going to be there in a matter of days to review all the documents, take the classified materials out, and return them to the government. And that they have the security footage, they have the call logs, and that is what, in the indictment, at least for me, and reading the whole thing, seems to be the most damning, that the government feels very confident with the timeline and the evidence that they have.
And that's, of course, the obstruction charges.
Yeah.
Right? And I think the reason that there's some significance to that is, as you've seen, most of the political arguments that go to this focus on a couple of different things. One is, obviously, there seems to be a discrepancy in two systems of justice here. And I know, Smug, you've talked about this a lot. There's been previous examples of Hillary Clinton. There's still outstanding examples of Joe Biden. There's even documents with like Mike Pence and others where you haven't seen people bring charges. It seems from my perspective that the obstruction piece of this is where this goes awry. He is not actually being charged with the possession of any documents that he turned over after the Department of Justice asked for it. He's being charged with the documents when they asked for it back, and then he basically didn't do it.
Right.
And then had attorneys knowingly or unknowingly, according to the documents, represent that they were all turned over. So I don't know if that's a distinction or not, but again, you have to hearken back to Hillary Clinton and her server, a point that you've made, Smug, that's like, well, look, I don't know what she had, and she maintains there wasn't classified information on it. Whether there was or not, we'll never know, because they got rid of the damn thing.
That's
right?
the thing. She used that bleach bit, nuked all evidence, and I don't see her in jail for obstruction. I think, to me right now, this issue is 100% about equal protection under the law. If I don't see anything happening to Joe Biden for this, to all the various crimes that the Biden family is being tied to, whether it's even on video, and we didn't get any indictment there, but super fast. I mean, this is probably the fastest the Justice Department has moved on anything. We've gotten an indictment dropped on Donald Trump. We are still waiting to hear anything about the whistleblowers that have come out and said that the FBI was basically being told to protect the Biden family. They were kicked out. They're gone.
Yeah, I mean, there is still an investigation going on in the House, and I think Jamie Comer's committee actually made a lot of progress on that piece of it last week by getting more information that sort of ties the knot on Burisma payments, for example, and other things that would suggest that the President Biden himself was involved in Hunter Biden's business dealings, at least as it pertained to Ukraine. You've mentioned previously the 9 payments to family members from China. Again, the gun charge in Delaware, tax investigation into Hunter Biden, like all of those things seem to just sort of evaporate.
Poof. And that's the thing is, I think there's a lot of people in this country who are starting to recognize that beyond the hypocrisy of this, because it's not hypocrisy the same way I'd mentioned that like Hillary Clinton is tweeting and reveling in this when she herself, like you'd mentioned about the server, nukes all the evidence. It's about hierarchy. There's a protected class of people in this country who think they can get away with anything, and so far they've been proven right on that theory.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you in part, Smug. I think the difference is, and I think the Hillary example is better than some of the Biden stuff.
Well, because we don't know what we don't know.
We don't know what we don't know yet on the Biden stuff. There are still ongoing investigations. We know everything. We know the entire timeline of the Hillary Clinton stuff. You know, Hillary Clinton's people would tell you, oh, well, those emails that we deleted were about yoga and, you know, personal schedule, and I'm going to get a coffee, and it was nothing to do with her official job. I mean, I don't believe that, because you look at, you know, all of the crazy stuff that was going on with the Clinton Foundation and the trading of favors and whatnot, that I don't think there was a personal thing in her entire life, that everything she was doing for sale.
Right.
Obviously.
Right.
And then you add to that, like, the bleach bit component of this. Like, oh, okay, all right, fine. You had the bleach bit. If you turn over everything in government, you're going to do the bleach bit to, you know, all the stuff that's national security focused or that was job focused. The government's going to have a copy, and then you're going to make sure that no hacker could ever get back onto that server and stuff. But you bleach bit the whole thing.
Right.
Like, you're banging phones with hammers and stuff like that. But as a practical matter, and this isn't a fair thing, but what Donald Trump did differently here was got himself personally involved in these decisions and made a record of it. And it's on tape, it's in the call logs, it's in the surveillance, and Hillary Clinton had her lawyers do it. And it's that semantic difference that isn't probably fair, but makes him more of a target that can be defeated in this indictment, in my opinion.
Well, it seems like what went wrong here more than anything was, and this is the beginning of time. This is not unique to Donald Trump. You can ask a whole host of political figures who have dealt with all of this, you know, for 25 years. It's never really about the crime. I mean, in particular when it's a political crime that we're talking about here, or political in nature. The Department of Justice, generally speaking, gives people an opportunity to try to make it right, even when it's not right. Right? Even when you've clearly done something nefarious. But if you have the opportunity to sort of turn it all over and mea culpa this thing, more times than not, there is a resolution to it that doesn't involve a trial.
Right. It's like, go back to the whole Martha Stewart thing with the SEC.
And
she didn't get in trouble for insider trading. What she got in trouble for was lying to the feds.
And that's where I think this thing took a huge turn, because it was the impetus behind the Mar-a-Lago raid, which was so unprecedented up to that point. But now you put the timeline together, you got to understand what it is that the Department of Justice is thinking in that time period. Whether it's fair or not, I don't know. But they think that they have incredibly classified material. Like, we're talking about potential battle plans against adversaries of the United States. We're talking about potential nuclear capabilities of allies of the United States, things like that. And so you can understand when you ask for that back and it doesn't come back,
right,
why the government has a concern there.
But here's my thinking on that is, when you just mentioned that the issue they're having is they're charging with obstruction, not these documents.
Well, they're charging them on both, but that's the one that, at least from Duncan and I's perspective, looks tougher.
So I think what really bothers me about that is the spirit of what is going on here. Is they're saying that, oh, well, you can't cross the feds, you can't lie to the feds, whereas the sitting president and his campaign lied to the American people, saying, oh, listen, all this stuff about Hunter Biden is Russian disinformation. They had their friends at the CIA trot it out and say, oh, this is classic Russian disinformation, folks. During a campaign season, they lied to the American voters.
Yeah.
They got their win.
They did.
And they've turned their Justice Department on the leading Republican candidate opposing them in this election.
And it wasn't just like they lied about that. I mean, you go back to the beginning of the Russiagate probe, they were lying on FISA applications. They were lying about the providence of the dossier. I mean, they were lying about a lot of stuff and using the power of the government to attack Donald Trump. So I mean, like,
ruining people's lives.
Ruining people's lives.
Yeah.
So when people say, "Oh boy, will Donald Trump face a political price for this?" I don't know. I don't know if he will. I don't know if poll numbers are going to go down. After the New York case, they went up, and I think a lot of that is just Republican voters were lied to for so long.
That's right.
And so many things regarding Donald Trump that, like I wouldn't blame them for a second for not believing anything.
Well, primary voters at this point are conditioned to believe that whatever comes about in terms of an investigation of this former president is more likely than not over time going to be proven to be false. Because
that's
up to this point, that is the body of work.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah.
And so I think I don't blame people for thinking that now.
Yep. Right.
But it's why I wanted to play the Turley clip, because I think that was that. These guys take that out of the political, and the political arguments being made here, I think, are very good ones by Republicans. But what we're facing here in terms of what's happening today to Donald Trump is not a political deal. It's very much a legal deal.
To put
what its impact is on politics, I don't know. Anybody's guess.
To put a finer point on it for the listeners and viewers, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit in the beginning, but like there is a whole lot of difference between CNN reporting on intelligence that says so-and-so in unnamed sources and a federal indictment for a legal case against Donald Trump. Like fundamentally, those are different things, different thresholds of evidence that are required, to put that on paper. Like a reporter doesn't care. They want clicks, right? And so it just gets that. I think people need to understand the reason why we're taking it so seriously is it's the threshold of what it takes to do it, and that's what is concerning.
Yep. No, I think it's all big. What's that, Smug?
One important thing I think you brought up is saying that the press wants clicks. I think they want a little bit more. I don't know if you guys saw this story in the Washington Post. I feel like the press definitely wants violence. This is from the Washington Post. Trump's Miami court date brings fears of violence. Rally plans. It says federal and local authorities on Sunday amped up security preparations ahead of Donald Trump's first appearance in federal court on criminal charges here, monitoring online threats and potential gatherings of far-right extremists while marshaling more police officers to be on duty. It says escalating violent rhetoric in online forums, coupled with defiant statements from the former president and his political allies. Oh, these defiant statements. I mean, this is an act of terrorism. The same way that they said that like these moms showing up to school board meetings are domestic terrorists.
Yeah.
The journalists really just want something to happen.
Well, if you've noticed, anytime there is something that is a provocative statement out of the right, it's basically ushering in the entire framework that they've used to characterize Jan 6th, right? Which is what this is. They're basically saying that the president, by not having a staid sort of accepting view of the charges that are against him, is somehow provoking violence in Miami.
Right. And that's the thing is their whole playbook has been to silence all dissent, claiming that words against them are violence. People are going to die. Like has become their just rallying cry. If you disagree with me, you don't understand. People are going to die.
Right.
That like kind of not just a defense, but it's an offense that they use to maintain control and silence anyone with a different opinion. Like they're saying online forums, the same way we'd mentioned about how the Biden campaign and all their allies were saying that the Hunter Biden stuff was Russian disinformation. And then they got social media networks to ban people who are posting any of it. Because it's so fake that if you post it, well, we've got to make sure that person is silenced. This is like, and the fact that journalists are part and parcel with this whole attempt to silence anyone disagreeing with the narrative of the left is just stunning. It's just absolutely crazy.
Well, it also implies that people can't think for themselves. I mean, this is a great quote. Jacob Ware, an extremism researcher at the Council of Foreign Relations, likens the widespread embrace of such positions to mass radicalization, quote unquote. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so look, as we've explained, there is obvious need for healthy skepticism of any investigations or charges that have come against Donald Trump, because the entirety of his public career has had one investigation after another that have come up absolutely bone dry. Mm-hmm. That is not like radicalization. That is a conditioned norm where people are in. I also think that not just Republican voters, not just primary voters, but basically anybody in this country, not anybody. There's places on the far left that can't do this, no question. But most people look at these things and process it, and they think about it, and they make sense of what they're seeing or not seeing. Now, the skepticism at some point may give way to like a, holy shit, that was dumb. Why would this guy do that? Why would he put himself, when he knows the entirety of the Department of Justice, the Biden administration, is going to give him the hardest possible time? Why would he put himself in a situation where he's made it so easy for them? Right? That may happen at some point. It's not going to happen now. It's not going to happen now at all, because most people believe, because of the body of work, I got to see more. I gotta figure out where this thing ultimately goes. I don't think that you've got a primary electorate, as much as the press would like to paint everybody with the same brush, that everybody's just brain dead to facts. And everybody is just like unwelcoming of any sort of obvious evidence one way or another when it comes to Donald Trump or what he may or may not have done. I think people are definitely skeptical on the front end of anything.
And also, when they bring in their quote, what do they call this clown? A radicalism, an extremism researcher.
Extremism.
So I think part and parcel with this. So there's a cottage industry of these clowns. I mean, there's no PhD in extremism, believe it or not. These are people who have found a way to create a job for themselves over the media's obsession with Donald Trump.
Right. They were Russia experts, then they were COVID experts. Now they're extremism experts.
Bingo.
Yeah.
What about disinformation experts?
I almost forgot. But the extremism and the disinformation guys are sometimes one and the same. The Chiron just depends on what the subject is of that evening when they show up on MSNBC.
It was like that dude back in the day on Fox, Peter Johnson Jr. or whatever.
Yes.
That it was Ailes' guy, and like every single time there was something that came up that was like it's a healthcare emergency, he's a doctor. If it's a legal emergency, he's a lawyer.
Amazing.
Yeah. I remember that guy. But the left has now perfected this.
Yeah.
That's the thing is specifically in this, when they say that, oh my God, there's going to be this like just wave of radicalization and violence. People's memories aren't so short to forget that there was a summer where the left was burning every city in this country, across the country. And what did the government, what kind of a response do we get from the experts? You had the CDC say, actually, it's better to be out rioting than the COVID. The more danger is actually in white supremacy.
Yeah.
You have to go out and burn cities.
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, that's why people are so skeptical of all this stuff. Anything the government tells you at this point, there's at least half the country doesn't believe it.
I anticipate, this thing in Florida is going to be a circus, absolute circus. I hope for the people who do show up there that they're aware of the circus that the media wants to create, and everybody's very peaceful and calm, because I think it's probably going to be a circus.
Yeah, the moment it's something else, then all of a sudden it becomes an entirely different story. None of the people who were involved in want.
Yeah.
To be honest with you. So here's an interesting wrinkle, and the New York Times reported on this. The Trump-appointed judge is said to be handling the document case. Fascinating, right? Former President Donald J. Trump, criminal indictment on charges stemming from his handling of classified documents, will be overseen, at least initially, by a federal judge whom a higher court criticized for a series of rulings that were unusually favorable to Mr. Trump during the early stages of the investigation, according to 5 people familiar with the matter. The judge, Eileen M. Cannon, who was Mr. Trump appointed to the bench in 2020, is scheduled to preside over the former president's first appearance in federal district court in Miami on Tuesday, the people said. In general, judges who handle initial appearances go on to preside over the further proceeding. It was not clear whether Judge Cannon would remain assigned for the entirety of Mr. Trump's case. Judge Cannon's involvement was earlier reported by ABC News. So that's interesting, right? I mean, and it's the one thing you're going to get. It's a benefit, a downstream effect of his effectiveness in confirming judges.
I think that's the thing, is that, the media especially loves to try to play this angle of that, oh my God, our court system is broken. We have to pack the courts.
Yeah.
And then there was this Supreme Court reporter for NBC News calls this judge a loose cannon, attacking their integrity.
Which is wild.
And it's become so commonplace for journalists to attack sitting judges and to encourage, this erosion in faith in the church. And when these people were preaching to us about the importance of institutions.
Right, and law and order. It's like, we believe in law and order. That's why we must indict Donald Trump, but not with that judge.
Exactly. They're like, it has to be a judge that
only judges that we appointed 20 years ago.
And that's the thing is, you see all these attacks across the spectrum that have been happening, whether it's on the Supreme Court, whether it's on individual judges. If the left doesn't feel like they have a complete and total advantage of a kangaroo court, they think that, as journalists, we have to undermine the integrity of any of this rulings, anything that happens.
Yeah, no, I saw a whole CNN segment today
examining the credibility of Miss
like
Judge
going through her whole CV, and trying to undercut her.
Yeah, just for those of you who don't remember this, the reason why this became controversial is that Judge Cannon, according to the New York Times, effectively froze a significant portion of the government's inquiry, barring prosecutors from using materials seized at Mar-a-Lago for any investigative purpose connected to the case against Mr. Trump. So that goes to the whole theory that you cannot execute a warrant to go find things that you said you're there to find and then find other things that open up new pieces of an investigation, right? Pretty classic jurisprudence in many jurisdictions. Apparently not as it relates to Mr. Trump.
Yeah.
Right.
And so this sparked tons of outrage on the left, accusing Judge Cannon of being somehow impartial.
And then they bring up that, like, this judge was appointed by Donald Trump, and they don't bring up that the person bringing these charges up, that they are the same person who brought those fake charges against Governor Bob McDonnell that he ends up getting exonerated on after the fact. His wife produced a documentary about Michelle Obama. They're Biden-Obama donors.
Yeah.
But that's, to the press, that's not any sort of bias.
No, this is a principle.
This judge who professionally is selected because they're an unbiased individual, they're biased.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, they're never going to get a fair hearing from the press. But our hope here is that the facts of this case actually proceed. Because, look, if you listen to Jack Smith, who's a special prosecutor, what he said is he wants a quote-unquote speedy trial. What does that mean? I haven't a clue what it means to have a speedy federal trial. I just assume these things are like years, but maybe not in this case.
He's like, listen, we have an election coming up. We got to block this guy.
Well, it may not be the last thing he's involved in either. I
don't know what he means by speedy trial. I don't know what favors Donald Trump.
I don't either.
You know what I'm saying? So, like, Donald Trump might want to drag this out. It's possible.
But you could see, look, if it takes a year to get to trial, you could see a scenario where Donald Trump is the nominee of the Republican Party in a presidential election year and is all of a sudden in a federal courthouse facing charges that could put him in prison for years.
Yeah.
That seems to me, from a Department of Justice standpoint, in a process standpoint, the worst possible scenario.
Right. But if Donald Trump is going to put up a case against this as a defendant, he's going to be afforded every right, I would hope, to file motions and seek a continuance if he needs to deal with evidence that he doesn't know. So, like, this process could take a very long time.
It could take a very long time.
And that might be in his interest. It might also be in Trump's interest for this to be a speedy trial and come to a conclusion if he feels like he can beat this case.
Yeah. You just don't know.
It depends on who he hires. Who, like, as of recording this, like, I don't know who he's going to be represented in Miami.
Yeah. Well, look, as we wrap up this part of it, here's the one suggestion I have to audiences that are listening to all of this. I think it is entirely possible to be a healthy skeptic of charges that are brought against Donald Trump by the government. I think it is more than obvious to be concerned about what seems to be two systems of judgment of justice based upon your political affiliation over the last few years. No question about it. I also think it's possible to do both of those things without beclowning yourself and pretending as though some of the things that have been alleged here are just fine. Because if they're proven to be true, they're not fine. They're not fine at all. You can't walk around with documents that endanger American soldiers. You can't have conversations with authors of memoirs about highly confidential things that could imperil our ability to have a serious national security response to things that are happening around the world. You can't do that.
Right.
Nor is it okay to lie to federal investigators one way or another. Now, I'm not alleging that all of that is true by any stretch of the imagination. That's what the government's alleging. I'm just saying, you don't need to dismiss all of that and pretend like that's nothing to see here in order to defend Donald Trump. Because the history has shown that a lot of these charges have not held water, and they may not here. But don't walk yourself into a situation where you're pretending like there's nothing to see here. Because that indictment, that's not nothing to see here. It's just not. It's just not. And you've seen a lot of responses on both sides that would suggest that there are a lot of clowns in this area.
Speaking of a circus.
Yeah, speaking of a circus, and it sort of relates. I mean, look, Politico wrote a piece about how long shots try optimism and strategy in GOP primary of doom and gloom.
They're 100% stealing our discussion.
This is what we said.
Optimism. Wow, that's a message that's really starting to sing.
Yeah, we started to talk about this, and then lo and behold,
yeah,
many of our listeners that don't like to admit to be listeners decided to pen articles on this.
No.
For weeks, the frontrunners in the Republican presidential primary have painted current events in increasingly apocalyptic terms in fundraising appeals, likening his indictment on Thursday to watching a Republican die. DeSantis, who had previously suggested the government is imposing a biomedical security state, said the weaponization of federal law enforcement represents a mortal threat to a free society. It's nonstop doom and gloom. A strategy squarely in line with public polling that suggests the Republican electorate's sky-high dissatisfaction with how things are going in this country with a Democrat in the White House. Yet it is two behemoths in the primary that are competing for this angry vote. What they go on to talk about is what we talked about, in that you've got a handful of folks here, Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, now we see Mike Pence, who are certainly trying out more of a Reagan approach, trying to do the Morning in America shtick. It'll be interesting now with the backdrop of these charges against President Trump, whether or not that has any hold in an electorate. And I think our suggestion is we just don't know yet. But you guys have any updated thoughts on that?
I think it could. I mean, you know, especially like a lot of folks said during Tim Scott's announcement that, you know, you saw the reaction from all Republicans. I didn't see a single person who was like, oh, no, I didn't enjoy hearing things that make me feel hopeful about the country. You saw a really welcome response to that message.
Yeah.
And I think especially right now where the news cycle is basically 24/7. Everything is terrible. Here's why. The world is ending. And it's kind of like, I mean, I don't want to say everyone hates their job, but you know, when you get home and you get to take off your shoes and you sit down, you take a breath. I think for a lot of voters, you're going to get the same kind of feeling of like, especially if you're out in Iowa or New Hampshire where these candidates are visiting and you hear, you know, you attend one of their events and you hear something that makes you feel good. Like, you know what? I think we can do this.
Yeah.
I think that might sing.
Is that like what you like to do on a Wednesday night after a hard week's work?
I take off my shoes and I'm like, I'm done with this, man. I've given enough.
Look, I don't know if they're mutually exclusive, right? Like, I don't think it's all positive. I don't think it's all doom and gloom. I think you go back to Bill Clinton, right? Like the famous Bill Clinton thing was like, I feel
Town
your pain.
called Hope.
Yeah, and I feel your pain. Like that is what people saw in him. He had a positive message, but you still had the sense that the struggles you did have, he could speak to those, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's clearly a lot of, especially coming out of COVID, that I think a lot of Republican primary voters look at and they're like, there has to be some retribution. Like, it isn't all hopeful optimism. There's some things that went wrong that we need answers for. And so you have to be able to do both of those things. You can speak in Reagan-esque terms, and I think, but you have to also acknowledge the pain that people have for reasons that are justified. The other thing I would say, though, you know, because I watched over the weekend Donald Trump's speech at the Georgia convention, and he was very strong at the top with you know, most of his message and a real barrel of the bat sort of stuff. then he kind of went back into this stuff of like, oh, you know, we can't win because these elections, and then he's reading off, you know, the elections in Georgia and going into David Perdue, and
at one point he suggested
that David Perdue actually would have won that primary, but it was rigged for Governor Kemp. Governor Kemp won by 50 points. 52 points.
Right.
If Governor Kemp stole that election, it was an Office Space situation where we wanted to steal it by 0.5%, but somebody moved the decimal by 2 and he won it by 50.
Like it's as someone pointed out, like not even Saddam Hussein would rig elections to win the
right?
And it's like, come on, man.
And it's you know, Trump just goes into this stuff where like
to your point though, in the poll that showed that the vast majority of Republicans were skeptical about the charges brought against President Trump, the same electorate that said that, 68%, said we don't want to hear anything
talking about 2020
or
the problem
2020
is,
or anything else.
And the reason why I'm saying this for all the Trump, you know, folks out there on the campaign who are listening to this, like, what do you think you're doing to our voters? You're depressing their turnout. You're making them feel hopeless. Gosh, I mean, odds-on favorite to be the nominee. You want to convince all these people who love you that there's no possible way that we can fix it? At the top of the speech, you're saying I'm the only one who can fix it. And then you're saying no one can fix it because it's rigged.
Yeah.
It's dissonant. It doesn't work. It's not a good message.
Part and parcel to this, kind of connected, is I saw some of your comments were making the rounds in an article. I don't know if you saw it.
Cockburn.
Specifically.
Cockburn got you?
He got me in the American Conservative. So, you know, I mean... So to provide context for everybody,
because it's a very important and great argument, and I think it's very important for folks to hear this.
Yeah. So the article in the American Conservative that they had quoted me in was about Turning Point USA announced this ballot harvesting initiative.
Yeah.
Right. And they're going to do it in Arizona and in Wisconsin and in Georgia.
Yeah.
Right. And my comment on this, and I've said this a lot of times, so it's probably not a surprise to anybody, but I think ballot harvesting has become this cope for people who want to obfuscate the other underlying problems with the party.
Yeah.
And that Donald Trump, for whatever reason, and his allies convinced our voters who used to kill it, I mean, absolutely fucking kill it in early vote and absentee by mail. I mean, that's how we won elections in Arizona.
That was bread and butter.
It was our bread and butter. And in 2020, Donald Trump was like, well, it's going to be fraud if you vote by mail. And so all these people held out for Election Day. And so not only you're competing with Democrats on Election Day, you're competing them having banked votes, all of early voting, and absentee by mail. And so, you know, things happen on Election Day. You know, it snows, right? Or your car breaks down, or you get sick, or you got to work. You got to work 2 shifts, and you can't get to the polls. And so if you're always banking on just voting on Election Day, you're going to bank less votes than if you did for the 6 weeks prior, voting by mail. And so...
What was your primary critique, though, of the idea that the ballot harvesting is the solution or the panacea to this?
Well, the issue is that they're using ballot harvesting, acting like we've never fucking done it. like everybody took the Men in Black flash thing and deleted all the history of the Republican Party winning elections. We used to be very, very good at this.
Yeah.
Right? And so they're kind of using this ballot harvesting thing, massive investment. They're going to spend millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars to solve a problem that can also be solved by running better candidates and stop telling people that elections are rigged.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's as simple as that, folks.
That naturally with the infrastructure that's involved.
Are you saying that if you're a candidate for an election and you tell people that elections are ridiculous, they're rigged, and you can't trust them,
right,
that might make them say, what's the damn point?
Yeah, I mean, how do you ballot harvest a person who you tell that elections are rigged?
Yep.
That it doesn't fucking work. And I'm sorry, but like, if you're going to sit there like Donald Trump and do that in the Georgia convention, mind you, he got his ass kicked in those counties surrounding Atlanta, right? Are you going to go ballot harvest Cobb County? Yeah. Well, you're going to be ballot harvesting a lot of people who might be registered Republicans, but really hate the fact that he says elections are rigged. And you know what? They're not going to vote for him. So what the hell are you spending the money ballot harvesting if you're telling people that elections are rigged?
Yeah, it
just doesn't work, dude. It doesn't work. I only say it because people are going to spend millions and millions of dollars on this. and we got to do it the right way. And the other thing is, like, this is a marginal issue. It is a big deal to do it. I would love for us to do it everywhere we possibly can, but it is not the real problem because you look at the control case. The control case is New Hampshire. There is next to zero absentee by mail, next to zero early vote. Like, they have very strict rules on all of that. Like, you need we need like a doctor's note and a note from the principal. You know, like you just can't do it. And so you look at a place like New Hampshire, we got crushed in New Hampshire.
You mean Diamond Don Baldock? Is that what you're talking about?
All on an election day vote, right? Yeah. Like, so the theories of, oh, well, gosh, we can't give them our mail ballot because then they'll know how to steal it because they know how many votes they need to add. It didn't happen in New Hampshire. We just got fucking boat raced because we had bad candidates. Like, I'm sorry, but wake up.
Yeah. It's a very, very good point. It's a very good point.
And it's an important one for folks to hear.
Yeah.
And along those lines, so there's that was TPUSA trying to announce. I think they're trying to raise $100 million for this effort to ballot harvest.
And look, be careful about this. And look, I'm not shitting
on them.
They can do whatever they want to do.
Go in it with open eyes, right?
I would say two things. One is go into it with open eyes, but two, there's a lot of people in this line of work, the line of work that we're sitting here talking to cameras and talking into a microphone, who've never done shit when it comes to electing people. And they may not have the best idea of how to go about putting together infrastructure to do that.
Right.
They may be incredibly entertaining. They may be very persuasive. They may be people that you want to take with them in your battle against the left everywhere you go. And maybe want to like think through and do some research before you're just sending money to go do stuff like ballot harvest in New Hampshire, for example.
Yeah.
where it doesn't exist. Anyway, a couple things I wanted to get through before we get out of here. The first is a special fan of the program.
Mm-hmm.
We got a note that was really, really great from this guy. It says, to my friends of the Ruthless Variety program, that's bold trendsetter smug, the dashing and charismatic Josh Holmes. Oh, isn't that nice?
Mm-hmm.
The Right and Honorable John Ashbrook and Will Duncan.
I mean, at least I have the courage to show up to work.
The man.
You're going to call John Ashbrook the Right and Honorable. I invented King of the Hill. I was the judge and jury.
I knew that was going to get him.
This gentleman, whoever he is or woman, knew they were going to get my goat.
That's, I think, the reason.
Yeah.
I think the reason.
Well,
so I say he characterizes you as the man who needs him to have people go buy him drinks.
I'm gonna take a pitch there. Ashbrook's not here to defend himself. I'm gonna take a pitch.
Take a pitch. My family's from the Detroit area. My middle brother Matt introduced me to you guys a few years ago with one of your Thanksgiving episodes.
Always a classic.
Nice.
Great annual tradition.
We listened to the program and laughed our asses off before an inevitable Lions loss.
See, I love that, and the Lions always play on Thanksgiving,
yeah,
so like
totally.
Special place in his heart, I'm sure.
So good. It provided us with ample amount of ammunition for our dinner discussion, and our liberal oldest brother, even he, despite the dearth of humor all liberals have, enjoyed some of the cracks we made. Not too long ago, I woke to a text that nobody ever wants to receive. Matt told me he had a stroke. As you can imagine, this was terrifying, especially at his age of 50. This is someone I've looked up to my entire life and whom I always got advice from. However, his pig-headed obstinance and mule-like stubbornness worked in his favor this time. He's handled his recovery like a boss. Within 8 days, he walked a mile around the hospital campus and was headed home.
Incredible.
Now he still does regular physical therapy. He listens to the program while he does it. That's just wonderful. So I ask you to please give him a shout out. It would mean a great deal to him if you did. Thank you, guys. His name is Matt Wilk. Matt is the county chair for the Wayne County Republicans. A good man, Matt Wilk. And yes, our Polish family name is incorrect on that site. Another side, as a duty-designated representative of the Polish Americans, I hereby demand similar mistreatment of our ethnicity by smug as the rest of you.
That's incredible.
We are the OGs of ethnic humor, and it's our time, and our time is due. Let me start. Did you hear about the Polish terrorist who tried to blow up the bus? He burned his lips on the exhaust pipe. So let's take this in order. First of all, Matt Wilk, good luck with the recovery, pal. We really appreciate you listening to us. It sounds like you're doing great work. Your brother loves you dearly, and how can we not love you with such awesome stuff to say about the variety program? Now, shall we get into the Polish?
I mean, I just want to, like, I read this and it was just, I mean, it's incredible, you know, to hear these great stories of people coming together, listening to our show, like the Thanksgiving thing. You know, it's always great to hear that. Thank you so much for listening, and Matt, keep crushing it on that recovery.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've had a family member who had a stroke in recent years, and I'd offer you advice, but if you're walking a mile around the hospital,
you already did it
in
pal.
8 days, pal.
You're getting there.
Unbelievable. I mean, hats off to you, man.
I will say this: I heard recently that the Polish wanted to play a larger war in Ukraine, like they wanted to be a part of it, but they couldn't figure out how to drive their septic tank. That's for you, Matt. That's for you. We're going to look into more Polish stuff. I feel like you definitely deserve it after that. And finally, folks, we had a little bit of animal news here. I feel weird about doing this without Smash, but this deserves commentary. There was a black bear in Washington, D.C., in a neighborhood, terrorizing the good people of Washington, D.C. You don't often get bears in a city like this.
No.
And so I looked into this story. It said, so this from the AP, it says a young black bear gave residents of a quiet northeast Washington neighborhood a start Friday morning when they woke to find a furry interloper wandering backyards, sniffing around garbage cans. Basically what ends up happening is the bear takes a look around. It found a nice tree, I guess, in someone's backyard, goes up there and just sits on a branch, right? And like all these like police, animal control, all these people are like, oh my God, they like set up a perimeter, and the bear is just like watching the chaos from a tree until they like hit it with a tranquilizer dart. Which is such a power move.
I also think it's every time you see that, it's like they fall from huge limbs. Like you might as well just take a 50 cal to the thing because it's gonna fall like 30 feet.
I mean, they're built like tanks apparently, and I know like this is probably 10 years ago where it was like I can't remember where there's a bear again in a neighborhood, and it was like up like 30 feet, and they hit this thing, and it just like nosedives, but it's totally cool with it. Like,
but do they get like, you know, the cartoons where there's the apartment on fire and there's like the fireman below with the trampoline?
Oh, that doesn't look like they did that.
No, they don't do that for bears.
It does. I don't think the bears get the trampoline.
Oh man!
But I've seen that kind of thing before. They've done it with like other animals.
Oh yeah, like a house cat. You throw it out the window. Maybe you throw the dog out.
Get the tramp.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
and then they're sort of shuffling back and forth.
And then the end of the story, the EP didn't report this, but this was when, they did. But after they trank dart the thing, they're like, we're going to give it a checkup, make sure it's not like rabbit or something. And then they're going to release it in a forest in Maryland. It's like, there could be no worse ending for this bear. You're now living in Maryland, buddy.
I mean,
you should have asked them to use live rounds.
We are going to get so much hate mail. But you know,
congratulations, you free bear.
It is.
Welcome to Baltimore.
He's gonna get shot anyways. He lives in Baltimore. He's already done.
It is classic DC that the cops show up and you put the criminal right back on the street.
Well, it's true to form. Yeah. It's true to form. The city council. It's nice to know that human or mankind, whatever, it goes to bears too. That's good. The other animal piece that we got to touch on: 20 killer whales spotted off of San Francisco, according to AP. So we've had this huge problem overseas where they're sinking ships.
Yeah, I saw another thing. Folks were tweeting it at me over the past couple of days. Of I guess there's a pack of them that have been just like sinking people's boats, like in the Atlantic, large ships.
Yeah,
they'll just roll up and start taking them out.
Yeah, you may have missed.
You missed it because you had the newest variant of COVID.
His menopause week.
We talked about this on the show. Yeah, no, it's.
No. After that incident.
Oh,
this is one that's happened over the past few. It's become a pattern that they are attacking ships. And now, so here's the thing: is it says that at least 20 of these killer whales were spotted off San Francisco.
They're ready to take stuff out.
Fine by me. Fine by me.
Wait,
hate them in San Francisco. That town has asked for everything terrible possible. The people vote for punishment. They want hell on earth. They voted it in time and time again. Send in the whales.
We need to figure out a way to scramble their echolocation so that they can't communicate with each other.
Yeah,
and like in any war, right?
You got to split them up.
You want to destroy, what is it, comms and infrastructure,
right.
first off.
Right. Well, these whales can communicate across miles by echolocation.
Can they really?
If we can figure out a way to sort of stop that, we can stop them from organizing.
It could be like Hank's naval force, though, if you think about it, because it's West Coast.
Right.
I'll tell you, there's always been, and we used to, when we had a really great country, know how to deal with this, is whales are a renewable resource.
Yeah.
They're food. They'll give you oil.
Yeah.
You can just spear them.
Yeah.
And it works. You bring them back on ships. There's been great books written about this.
Or plug their blowhole.
Yeah, if Ashbrook was here.
As Ashbrook suggested.
Ashbrook has pointed out.
Deal with that problem.
Which is an innovative way of taking out a whale. Anyway, we got a great interview for you. I think we should get right to it. I want to welcome to the program a very distinguished guest. We've been following his work for quite some time. He's a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserve, Iraq War veteran, highly decorated, I might add. A Bronze Star Medal and a Combat Action Badge. And now he's sort of running some things here in Congress. He's a congressman from Cincinnati. Mm-hmm. Brad Wenstrup, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
Listen, this is fun. You should probably know that one of our co-hosts who didn't have the dignity of showing up is you're like his home congressman, John Ashbrook.
Yeah, and actually, though, the district's changed. They might change back because of legal wranglings. So I'm out of Cincinnati proper now, but I have pretty much most of southern Ohio.
Yeah, there you go.
In my district now. So it's a great part of the country.
It is a great part of the country. I've been fortunate to spend a good amount of time there. Great people. You're going to get a lot of candidates marching through there, I imagine, in the next year and a half.
Oh, yeah. We get trampled on by presidential candidates.
I imagine.
Well, you brought us a lovely tribute here from Cincinnati Distilling, Ohio Straight Bourbon, and I make a promise we were not going to share any of it with John Ashbrook.
None. Not a single sip of it.
You must be present to win? Is that what you're saying?
That's right. No question about it. And Cincinnati, as we discussed, close enough to the Commonwealth of Kentucky where you probably have some claim on the water of bourbon.
Yeah, I would say, and I married into it too. You know, my wife's a Kentucky girl, and she introduced me to bourbon. I was like, I'll have a beer, but no, she said, try this.
Yeah, right. Well, it's addicting. There's no question about that. Listen, we want to talk about some serious stuff first. You've got a very, very big hearing this week. You are the chairman of a subcommittee that's overseeing a whole bunch of things on the COVID front. You're a doctor too, by the way, which gives you a leg up in determining a lot of this stuff. But this week, the CDC director, Rochelle Walensky, has agreed to testify.
Yes.
How's this going to go?
Well, we're eager to have her come in. I can tell you we have a strong doctors caucus in the House of Representatives. On the Republican side, about 20 members, doctors, dentists, pharmacists. We met with her through COVID, and she would do some virtual hearings with us and things like that. So, but this is a little different because this is more, if you look at the big picture of what the subcommittee is supposed to do, it's really touching on everything. It's an after-action review of all things pandemic, which involves all people. Mm-hmm. Right? So after-action review, lessons learned, what did we do right, what did we do wrong? And if things weren't done right, was it because, hey, we were flying blind, no one knew what the right thing to do was because this was so novel, so new? Or were we making decisions based on politics or making decisions based on personal endeavors or gaining or ideologies? And that's what we have to figure out because it has no place in medicine.
Right.
And so we're on a fact-finding mission for sure. So this week we do have the CDC director, and really the focus at this time is based on the guidelines put out by the CDC during COVID. And again, going back to the beginning, we're flying blind. So people are saying, lock down, do this, do that, mask up, because they really didn't know. But as data came in, did we make the right corrections? And who had the influence on the guidelines being made? So in particular for this, we've already had the head of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten.
Yeah.
And
I noticed that one.
And she, that's a political organization, let's face it. They're not a medical organization. They're not a scientific organization.
You'd like to think they look after the kids, but it seems too secondary.
You would think that would be the first priority. And, through that, I really have not seen anything where the teachers were really driving to get the kids back in school. Yeah, I think it's fair to say we need some mitigations for health, right? They wanted to be vaccinated first. The nation said, okay, teachers, you can go get vaccinated.
Right.
But most of the mitigations they wanted in place were delaying getting the kids in school or made it very difficult to get the kids in school. For example, if you say they should be 3 feet apart, but they say it needs to be 6 feet apart, how do you fill a classroom with everybody 6 feet apart?
Yeah.
And what was the science behind that? What was the need for that, right?
Right.
And, as time went by, you had, private and Catholic schools. And I'll say in my rural areas, the rural schools, they were going to class.
Uh-huh.
And so there seems to have been quite an effort, especially in the urban areas, to just, and I'm quoting this word, trigger. They were looking for a trigger to close the schools. This is in their internal documents. But also when we had Randy Weingarten, and we discovered, one, that she had communications with the Biden transition team right away. Right away. There was never a relationship with the Trump team. So you had a relationship with the Biden transition team, which means you had a relationship with them once they were sworn in. And then also we found out that Randy Weingarten had CDC Director Walensky's personal cell phone.
And that's where this thing gets a little scary, right? Because as you said, Randy Weingarten is an intensely partisan political figure and has run her organization thusly. And maybe it's not surprising that a union boss of teachers is talking to the Biden administration during a transition, but it is certainly interesting and concerning that someone like that is talking to somebody who's supposed to be guided by science.
Exactly. That is exactly the point that we want to make here. Look, they admit they're a political organization. So be it. That's politics in America. You have every right to try and say this is what we want. This is what our teachers want. Just like any, union demand or any employee making demands, they can do that. That's fair enough. That's America. But what's not right is when our federal agency, which should be agnostic and based on science.
And if any one of them is, it's CDC. You should be.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, all our other agencies, you could debate that. There's a lot of politics, but when it comes to your health and to science and medicine and saving lives through medical practices and guidelines, shouldn't you be speaking based on data? And we had data coming from all around the world. We had countries that didn't shut down.
Yeah.
When you want the trigger for closure to be based on the rate of transmission in the community, when the community rates were always higher than the in-school rates, the in-school was the safest place.
Right.
And you could surmise that it was safer for the kids to be in school than going to and from some daycare or whatever the case may be. And
yet that was never articulated by the administration.
No, people weren't getting spoken to. Ask yourselves through this process. And I would say Trump administration or the Biden administration, the bedside manner was horrible.
Yeah.
And we've come to a time in this country, unfortunately, where the trust is way down, but in part because you're not hearing from the right people. And I said from the very beginning, Americans should be hearing from the doctors that are treating COVID patients, not the person in the lab, not the politician. And there's nothing more egregious than President Biden's mandate that said you must get the vaccine or you're fired from your job. Is this really America?
Right.
I mean, this is a mandate that takes away your livelihood. Mm-hmm. And you didn't have a conversation with a doctor who can say, here's what the vaccine does. We find it's helping hundreds of thousands of people and saving a lot of lives if you have these criteria, these comorbidities, immune deficiency, age, all of these things seem to be greatly affected. We found from the trials that even though you got the vaccine, you can still get COVID, but you're less likely to be hospitalized.
Right.
We know from science that viruses produce variants, so we may see that. This is a conversation people want to have. And, Frank Luntz did a thing with us. And when I spoke to these hesitant people about the vaccine, as a physician, the pluses, the minuses, they said, well, I'm a little less hesitant now.
Yeah, people want to hear from the doctor.
They said, I want to be educated, not indoctrinated.
Right.
So you want to talk about lessons learned, mistakes made. That was a huge one. And so, but if the guidelines are not making sense to the public, but they're coming out because a union wanted them for their people, That is a big problem, and
Dangerous.
this has got to be cleaned. I mean, you've got to rebrand the CDC in some way going forward, in my opinion.
Well,
right?
Totally agree.
Randy's been going through a little bit of a rebrand herself. I don't know if you've noticed this, but she's been on sort of a charm offensive to rewrite all the history of what she did during COVID. And it felt like, to me, you know, in improv, when people do stand-up comedy improv, it's the phrase yes and, like, never end the conversation because you're trying to keep it all flowing, right? That's kind of way Randy worked with how she dealt with COVID in schools and getting kids back in the classroom. It was always yes and, yes and, yes and. Oh, you know, we want kids back in school, but, you know, we want to be careful how we do it. Okay, well, what does that mean exactly? Well, we got to the point where she was trying to basically extort the Biden administration for billions of dollars, saying schools have never been safe. You know, the air filters have mold in them. And so you got to this place where it just got so ridiculous. So the idea of her being able to weigh in from a political perspective on something like CDC guidelines is just
wild.
It's wild. I think it gets to the heart of the distrust that you were talking about earlier in our society, and we got to find a way to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, that seemed to me to be quite the grab, you know. And look, I'm sure there are better ventilation systems today than there were 40 years ago when these schools were built, or however long ago. I get that. But did that have anything to do with COVID per se? Right. Was it making a difference for the transmission of COVID amongst the kids, or for that matter, even the teachers? You know, when they wanted there to be mitigations for some teachers who had some of the comorbidities, I get that.
Yep.
That makes sense. I'm in with that.
Yeah, same as you are with senior citizen centers, right? I mean, vulnerabilities because of the statistical analysis were worth looking at and worth trying to figure out. But it's based on the analysis of everything we knew. And the thing that drives me, and I think you're perfectly hitting on this, is the disconnect between not only what doctors were telling their patients, but what even like pharmaceutical manufacturers were saying about the product. And then ultimately the policies that came out of people like Rochelle Walensky were massive. There's just a huge disconnect where somehow, some way, they decided that they were going to embark in a political mission that didn't seem to be supported by the underlying facts.
Yeah, and it didn't make sense. You're scratching your head. You know, when this whole thing started, we were in lockdown, right? And I'm like doing research. Yeah. What do we know about this? How do we treat people? You know, what kind of markers can we find in blood work? Remember, we had no test. We had, no vaccine of any type. And so what's going on with the body? Well, there's a huge inflammatory reaction in the lungs. Well, let's address that. You know, those types of things. And what are we seeing in blood work? What are we seeing with the immunoglobulins, those that fight infection? How are they changing that you can detect in blood work? But also, if you remember, we were doing things like convalescent plasma. So if somebody had COVID and recovered, get their plasma, match them up with somebody who's got COVID, and you can inject antibodies, which was the whole idea of the vaccine, of any vaccine, right? Is to be able to provide that type of immunity. But you notice, did you hear any more about convalescent plasma? No, everything was vaccine. Mm-hmm. Did you hear any more? You were chastised if you talked about those that had natural immunity. These were the very people that were using convalescent plasma, donating convalescent plasma, right? Why did that just go away? Why did we not make that one of our tools still?
Right. Yeah. And you're trying to get at, what's the decision-making tree here? Right?
Exactly.
How do we get to a point where we couldn't talk about certain things, had to talk about other things, and then created policy that, according to the data, didn't make a ton of sense?
Because you can't ask people to trust the science if you're not trusting them with the truth. It's as simple as that, right?
Right. And look, the science for natural immunity has been there for centuries.
Fauci talked about it constantly back in the day, and then suddenly he forgot.
and so, you know, what was taking place there? Same with, you know, the use of convalescent plasma. The thing is, you know how much it costs to administer convalescent plasma?
How much?
Well, you donate it, for one. That's pretty inexpensive.
Yeah, we like that. Yeah.
And so it's just spinning it down and administering it. Did that cost more than a vaccine? Where was the money? I don't know. These are the questions we got to ask. I mean, what was the reason really for ignoring these other possible treatments for people that I think people would have been a lot more comfortable with, because you understand the notion of someone's natural immunity being developed and you sharing that more so than something made in a lab that where we don't really know what it might do 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now. And that's still a fair assessment. But, as we're in this committee, I hear my counterpart, it was also a physician, said the vaccines are safe. Well, you don't know that 100%. And not only that, the other thing we want to look at is the adverse reactions. Were we tracking the way we normally do or should do in population health to see adverse reactions to the vaccine?
It's just a fascinating. What I like about the way that you're going about it is to ask the question, because in some ways there may be answers, despite the fact that you and I may disagree with it. There may be answers along the way of why people chose to do what they did.
Right.
The fear, though, is that there's a political piece of it. And it's I love that you brought Randy Weingarten into this discussion, because there's something that just feels inherently political about the decision making as we got along well into COVID.
And if I'm going to use what the teachers union sends me for part of my guidelines, I'm not going to plagiarize it. I'm going to at least change the wording.
People forget about that. People forget about that.
Yeah, when you copy somebody's homework, you got to change a couple answers. This is basic stuff.
Every C student knows that.
Yeah. Can't get too ambitious. A perfect A. We had a character.
So where do you think this leads? I mean, I imagine that this is a piece of the puzzle that you're trying to put together to lead to a better picture for the American people on the back end of all this.
Yeah, let's really get to that, because bottom line is we want to look at the next pandemic and say that we can predict it, prepare for it, protect ourselves from it, and maybe prevent it. That's it in a nutshell, those 4 Ps. That's the way I look at it. And I look at this whole thing as an after-action review, lessons learned, what's the path forward, what worked, what didn't work. Like I could say, you know what? We should use the military for logistics if we have to get vaccines out to everybody. They did a great job with that.
Yeah.
Those are things we should look at too. Again, what worked, what didn't work. But we also have to be able to have ourselves in a situation where we can assess what kind of damage was done and how do we prevent it in the future. And especially in this particular case with the school guidelines, the damage done to the kids academically, mentally, physically, et cetera, and then even when they were going back, some of them were told no sports.
Right.
No outdoor sports. I mean,
it's like hard to process, right?
It is a little bit difficult to process. But I mean, I look, my daughter, she's 5 years old. So she went, 2 years, very formative years with a mask on, not seeing people form their words.
Yeah.
She's in speech therapy right now.
Yeah.
She'll be fine, but I wonder, was that a result of
Yeah,
this?
we both have young kids in the same dynamic, and there is no question that it had impact. Whether it's lasting impact or not, we don't know, but it's certainly something you'd like to prevent going forward. And I imagine a piece of this is the abject reality that maybe a majority, but certainly a plurality of Americans, if you had a seriously deadly pandemic, not named COVID, that showed up on your doorstep tomorrow, I'm not sure people would take the government's word for any of it.
No, they would probably ignore it, and that's a problem. And here's a problem that's resulted as well, and I try to point this out. The mRNA vaccine, in many ways, some doctors don't like that I put it this way, but I think it's true. It was more of a therapeutic compared to, say, the polio vaccine,
right,
which truly prevented. Okay,
so the terminology itself, right,
was confusing for people, and by definition, it is a vaccine. So it falls under that category, but it functions differently than, say, the others. And the problem we have today is now you have so much distrust. You have a lot of young parents not wanting to get their kids vaccinated for the other vaccines. And especially if you were...
And that's problematic.
That's definitely problematic for our population health going forward. And so we don't want to see that. And so they're staying away from those things. So we may see a rise in this. And one of the things, and maybe you saw it with your kids or their classmates, the rise in RSV with that respiratory illness.
This winter was
our
horrible.
Children's hospitals were flooded.
Yeah.
Well, probably because they were so unimmune to much of anything, right?
Yeah.
They just were kept sterile, if you will. And part of our immune system, which is a beautiful thing, is that it builds you and makes you stronger.
It went through our house like wildfire after Thanksgiving.
You were basically Thanksgiving till a week ago. The Duncans were under wraps.
But it's horrible, and it's very scary as a parent with a young kid. I mean, like our 6-month-old had RSV, and boy, it is tough to fall asleep hearing that hacking next to you. It really is. You're just watching the breath rise and fall. I mean, it's terrifying.
So we want to come forward, not just with school closures, but guidelines in so many ways that we aren't harming Americans in more ways. Are we doing more harm than good with what we're doing? And you always have to evaluate. Do the benefits outweigh the risks? Those types of things. It's tough because you are talking about, in this case, a deadly virus.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. For some, not for all. And then we had so many situations where you had the lockdowns extended, don't go to your doctor, and so now there's a rise in cancers that had a drop off.
Yeah,
well,
diagnostics.
They weren't being diagnosed. They weren't going in, and so you're always worse off the later it is.
Yeah.
And we got to make sure we avoid that. I mean, I had a situation in one of my rural counties where the sheriff called me. He said, "Brad, I just had a guy 71 years old. He was scheduled for his painful hernia. And, he's in so much pain. They canceled him, didn't know when they were going to be able to do it. He was in so much pain, he took his life."
Oh, jeez.
Right?
You just hate to hear that.
Yeah. And it's like, and how many cases did they have in that rural hospital at that time? 0.
Mm-hmm.
So we got to start thinking about best practices too. What's the flexibility at a local level? What data do we have on a national basis that can drive your decision making in each locality?
Yeah, and I imagine just transparency in and of itself. If there is no definitive conclusions, but a transparency in and of itself is probably the first step to restore any sort of trust in the government's role in any of this, right?
Well, when you see a government that apparently it's not as essential for teachers to be in school with the kids, but the liquor store's open, and your church is closed.
Yeah, right.
This is going to set you off.
Yeah.
And it makes sense too that we see these things going in these directions. And again, I don't fault people at the beginning.
Yeah.
Everybody was panicked, didn't know the science. What's going on? But I also think, too, if I talked about bedside manner, I remember in Ohio, we had all the members of Congress on with the health director in Columbus, Ohio, and she says, hundreds of thousands of Ohioans are going to die. We're going to put hospitals out in the street and all this kind of stuff. And she said, it's extremely lethal. I said, hold on a minute with the last comment. Let's prepare for those other scenarios, okay? Let's be as prepared as we can. I get that. And hopefully in the future, we'll have it automatically, not making it up as we go. But I said, you say it's extremely lethal. If 6 people die and they're the only ones that you've confirmed had it, then it's 100%. But we are hearing of people that, they know they had it. Something was different.
Right.
It's going around, right? They had it and they got better.
Right.
So you can't say it's extremely lethal because maybe it's only 0.1%.
Yeah. Well, if it had
that are dying, actually dying.
Right, not baselining it with all the asymptomatic cases might have led to a lot of misguided policy proposals because what they were looking at was a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of the overall sample size,
and
right?
make it 100%.
Yes, I mean,
right?
if any of this has any impact on future generations mitigating the hyperbole in a situation like this, because I really think that's where this thing went off the rails. Because, as you said right away, we were all sort of nervous at first global pandemic in 100 years. I mean, it's like there's not a playbook to how to deal with this in the first 60, 90 days. But as we go along, the rhetoric continued to ramp all the way up. And all of a sudden, you had elected officials, important government voices, basically continuing to turn the volume all the way up. And at that point, you can't make rational decisions. Like, you're informing the public of one thing, and they're all in grave danger, how can you expect to make rational decisions, right?
And who's making the decisions and why?
Yeah.
So how do you at home make a rational decision when you don't know what you're getting?
Right.
You know, I compared who we needed to hear from. I said doctors treating COVID patients. I think back in the Gulf War when I was younger, and every night we heard from Schwarzkopf.
Yeah.
And America tuned in.
Yeah.
They trusted him.
Yeah.
He's the man in the arena, right? He's telling us what's going on. That's really what we needed. This was something that should have united us as a country.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, it has divided us more terribly than perhaps we were.
Yeah.
I would say, but this certainly added to it, and that's not how it's supposed to be. Something like a pandemic should unite the United States of America, just like 9/11 did.
Yeah.
You know, how do we work on this and make sure? But again, be led by people that you feel you know and trust, and that's the importance of the doctor-patient relationship as well. And we were telling people not to go see their doctor, and they'd end up in the emergency room, and then you saw things. Look, in my practice, I treat a lot of very serious infections, and most of the more serious infections are usually on the people that have other illnesses associated with their health. You know, whether it's, you know, and just compare it to the COVID, you had obesity, diabetes, but vascular disease, you know, they may have liver dysfunction, all kinds of things that I would see that would lead them to be more vulnerable to infections. But the one thing no one ever did before is take someone with a serious infection and put them in with a group of people that are the most vulnerable to get an infection. And that's exactly what happened in New York. And that is as even one of the Democrat physicians on the subcommittee said, I'm not a lawyer, but that seems like malpractice to me.
Yeah.
To any doctor, you're like, what in the world? You can't do that.
Right.
And I feel bad for the healthcare providers in those facilities that were strapped with that must admit
God.
type of a situation, because
Tragedy.
that was the order.
Yeah.
So that's another area that we're looking into with this committee.
Well, listen, I'm glad you're doing it, and I think if we're ever going to get to a point where we can restore public health at the federal level, this kind of thing is absolutely imperative to do it. So thanks for what you're doing. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, because we're now, we got a congressional baseball game coming up, and I think probably the first time nationally a lot of people heard your name was in that terrible, tragic shooting of Steve Scalise on the baseball field, and practicing for the eventual game that we're again going to have this week, which is a great tradition, by the way.
It is.
It's a terrific tradition. But I wonder if you wouldn't mind walking us through that day a little bit.
Yeah, I'd just start by saying that Steve Scalise took a bullet for all of us.
Yeah.
Because if he wasn't there, the Capitol Police weren't there. Mm-hmm. And, you know, there's...
people forget that.
Yeah, there's 2 Capitol Police undercover inside of a van. This guy has no idea. Look, a lot of people miss practice here and there. But if Steve wasn't there that day, this guy walks in and easily kills 20 to 30 members of Congress in their state.
That's just wild.
Because the fences are about 20 feet high. Everything had to happen right for Steve to be alive and for us to escape, and that's starting with Steve just being there.
Yeah.
Because the first shot was aimed at Trent Kelly, who was playing third base. Well, first of all, the guy had been out there for 2 months. He hated Republicans. It's all over his social media. He loved Bernie Sanders. He used the Y for his Wi-Fi and things like that. He had stuff in storage. I mean, he came from Illinois and planted himself here on a mission. Yeah. That morning, a couple people left early, and I usually had to leave early, but that day I could stay later. But as Ron DeSantis left and as Jeff Duncan left, he went up to them and said, these are Republicans or Democrats? You know, like, oh, this is cool, you know. And they said, Republicans. Well, he had names of Republicans in his pocket in their descriptions. But the first shot, he started taking from outside the fence on the third base side, which by the grace of God, it was the last day of practice, so pitchers weren't there because that's right where the bullpen is.
Oh, wow.
And he could just walk right up and boom, boom, right? Fortunately, again, by the grace of God, the groundskeeper told me later, he locked the third base gate the night before. It's usually open. So he had to fire through the gate at Trent Kelly, and he hit a link in the fence, and that's how it missed Trent Kelly, a 2-star general, 2 tours in Iraq, who starts yelling, shooter, and he starts doing the zigzag run. Fortunately, this field had actual dugouts like 5 or 6 steps down. So people dove into it, and you can still see the bullet holes above it. He used that third base dugout to shield himself, I guess as he's reloading or whatever. He's got a high-powered rifle. He comes around. Now he's shooting more towards the dugout and home plate area. And
you're in the dugout at this point?
Well, here's another, the miracle to me, for me, was I had just batted. I grabbed my glove. I was going to the outfield. And I got to about the pitcher's mound, and this didn't occur to me like 2 days later. I changed my mind. Take some more swings down in the batting cage, okay? And I didn't even like the batting cage because the machine was wild. You're doing a lot of ducking from this thing. But, I did, and the batting cage is down the first base line outside the fences of the field.
That's right.
So I was in the absolute safest place I could absolutely be. And so when the shooting started, I was like, is that what I think it is?
I mean, because you're one of the few people on the field who instantly has some knowledge of what that sounds like.
And I just completely went into military mode. I got down on the ground. Who's doing the shooting? How many are shooting? Because it's echoing off the buildings. People don't know. In this whole thing, there were 136 rounds fired.
Jeez.
Wow.
And if I might add, if you take out 20 to 30 members of Congress and their staff, changing the balance of power in the House of Representatives, that's an insurrection, if I can use the word appropriately.
Yeah.
Just saying. We'll leave that alone for now.
Yeah.
But so I had to move at one point because he was moving around, got behind another building. Now he's shooting right down my lane. I can see the blaze from the barrel, and I moved behind a bathroom. But the whole time, Steve's laying out on the field, just Steve. Everybody else had found some kind of cover somewhere, but 5 people were hit altogether, including both Capitol Police.
Jeez, man.
And when the opportunity came, then Alexandria Police came in. It was weird because he came back one more time from behind a building, this time with a 9mm and not a rifle. And that's right when Alexandria Police came in, and I could see the remaining Capitol policeman, David Bailey, and 2 Alexandria Police come in, and I was told later there was a sniper further back, and they hit him, and he started to go down, so I started running for Steve. A couple people from the dugout got to him first, but I went into military mode. I'm sweeping his body, see how many times he's hit. He's still talking, barely, but he's breathing, talking. He has a pulse, and I see his entry wound, and so I, again, just went into mode, pulled his pants down, looking for his exit wound, and it wasn't there. And so now I knew he was in bigger trouble. Because that meant it went up. And so it reminded me of a soldier we lost in Iraq, where we didn't get into the belly soon enough. So I knew he's bleeding, internally and very little externally. So I immediately asked somebody, give me your belt, and put it on as high as I could to at least stop the major artery to the leg from bleeding further, not knowing what else was going on internally. But he was still talking, but by the time he left, he was not. And then when medics came out, I said, how fast can you start an IV? Because I know he's losing volume, right? And they said, we don't have that. Well, what they meant was they didn't have it with them because it's on their ambulance, which they couldn't drive on the field. So the one medic, I met him later, he said, I knew what you meant, I knew what you were saying, he's dying inside. And so I pushed him ahead of anybody else, because all people saw was this small hole. But I pushed him ahead, and we got an IV, and he might not have made it if he went by ground, but then suddenly one of the Park Police helicopters landed on the field. So Park Police can be in the air anywhere, and this guy happened to already be in the air when the call went out. And he came in, and he was former military. I met him a couple months later, and he said, I flew that bird like I stole it. And I said, God bless you that you did. And Steve is just an amazing guy. He has never complained, and he has just fought through this. He no longer uses a cane or anything. He got a little bit of a limp. And he's out there at baseball practice every day.
Yeah, he's still back out there. Probably wouldn't be here today if not for the work of you and the people on that field, as you mentioned. Good Lord, what a story. Thanks to you. That can't, look, we're all in a debt of gratitude for it, because that was a hell of a time. Hell of a time.
Well,
I almost couldn't believe it. When I heard it on the radio as I'm going to work, I felt like I had to been missing something. Like it was just a bizarre experience.
Yeah, it was very, very surreal. And like I said, I just kind of went into military mode, and it was more later that I thought, that was really bad.
Yeah.
You know, that was really horrific, and how lucky we were in so many ways that everything, you know, fell together.
No kidding.
But I think people should recognize for what it was, because the FBI tried to tell us the guy just wanted suicide by cop. Well, it took us a few years, but we got that term, that changed to domestic violent extremism.
Yeah, which is exactly what it was. All right, so I got to get you out of here, but I have 3 questions that we ask every single guest. Right, we're going to turn the page here and get into the lighter side of the program, but everybody pays attention to these ones. So the first question is, if you could plan your last meal on Earth, what would it be?
Well, I did get asked this once before on another interview.
Did you? They're stealing our stuff?
I guess they are. And you know, the first thing that popped into my head was communion.
No. It's a pretty good answer.
That's a good answer.
We haven't had,
I don't think we've had that one.
No, but it probably greases the skids for the next step, right? That's a pretty good answer.
That's the plan.
Strategic.
Yeah.
Strategic. Okay, that makes sense. We'll accept that.
Thank you.
The second question is, and look, this is different, affects different people different ways, but the basics are, if you never got into this line of work and had this big sort of blue sky in the middle of your life, you could do basically anything you wanted with the benefit of retrospect, what would it be?
Well, I have to tell you that being a physician is one of the most rewarding fields you could be in. So if I could be a physician, surgeon, without government or insurance company interference, that would be heaven to me, because without their interference, I would also have more time for my wife and kids and go sailing and play sports.
You could do your job and then enjoy your family, rather than paperwork.
So that would just bring it all together for me. Just that one thing. Practice without government or insurance company interference.
Very, very well said. All right, so the third question is a little esoteric, and our view is that most successful people are motivated by one of two things: the thrill of victory or the agony of defeat. And it's not that anybody doesn't like winning or that anybody likes losing. It's what motivates you to get to the next level, work a little harder, try to achieve more. And the ultimate agony of defeat person we always explain is Michael Jordan, right? You can win 7 titles, you enjoy it for like 3 minutes afterwards, and then, there's something that somebody said in warm-up sticks with him for a lifetime. That's an agony of defeat guy. The thrill of victory people are people who just self-motivated, constantly glass half full, trying to get to the next level on their own because they think that they're capable of it. In that spectrum, where do you find yourself?
Well, and I can't say, I was really young that I loved the agony of defeat, right?
Yeah, nobody loves the agony.
You took it with great embarrassment, as a child. And I would say, though, as I got older, the agony of defeat was something that I tried to use to get to the thrill of victory. Mm-hmm. And, to realize what I could have done better, why there was defeat. And to then try and accomplish the goal that you weren't getting done, because you learn every step of the way. Yeah. And you get better and better and better.
You've just articulated a negative defeat guy. That's what it is. That's what it is. That's perfect. That's perfect. All right. Well, listen, thank you for joining us. Thanks for all your good work. I hope you stay in touch. Let us know what you're finding. If our people want to stay up to date and see what you're working on, help you out, where can they go?
Well, our Select Subcommittee has a own website, and you can reach out to us. We are the Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic. And so reach out to us anytime. Matter of fact, we're learning from people that are reaching out, as you might imagine, as they can share some of their experiences of what they thought did work well and what gave them confidence, and then what did not. I was out giving vaccines with the National Guard as a reservist. They let me do it, and we go on this bus, and we got it's a retirement home, and it's this older lady, and she sees me in uniform, sees my name, she goes, Wenstrup. She goes, can I get a selfie with you? And I said, yes, ma'am, we're allowed. I vaccinated her, and she says, I probably don't agree with you on one thing politically, but thank you for being here today to give me this shot.
Oh, that's good.
And I said, and that's America, ma'am.
Exactly.
And that's how it's supposed to work.
That's how public service works. Absolutely. Congressman Brad Wenstrup, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
So, look, we're going to learn a lot from Brad Wenstrup. He is, as we speak, getting into this hearing with Walensky. And as you could tell from the interview, he wants to build this case and try to figure out. I mean, it's easy to jump to a conclusion, as we have in this show, about what the motivations were for the Biden administration to, have mandates and lockdowns and keep kids out of school. And there's something to us that is very similar with their ideology writ large and how they'd like to govern. What he's done is sort of deconstruct all of that and just go right into the decision-making process.
Yeah.
Which I think is so good to ultimately get our whole country to a place where there's transparency to understand who's a political actor, who screwed up, and what we're going to do to change it in the future.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit with him about this after the interview, but, after 9/11, we had the 9/11 report, where we tried to figure out what went right, what went wrong, what was the the chain of events that took place, who was responsible for what we could do better, right? The advantage we had after 9/11 is we were united as a country.
Yeah.
After COVID, I don't think our country could be more possibly divided.
Right.
And the trust deficit that we have in this country is like something we have to fix. And the only way we fix it is having a similar style 9/11 report where these committees go in and they figure out that exact decision making and what we do. That's the only way. If this ever happens again, God, I hope it doesn't. If you want people to believe the information the government is telling them, you're going to have to admit the mistakes that were made.
Totally agree. Totally agree. And God bless him for being on that baseball field when Steve Scalise was shot too. Anyway, fellas, I think we did it. I think we've done it.
Absolute banger of an episode, gentlemen. Thank you so much to the good chairman for visiting us today, and thank you to our listeners and viewers on YouTube. Remember, if you haven't subscribed yet, get on there, subscribe, and check out all the goodies we got there. So, until next time, minions, keep the faith, hold the line, and own the libs. We'll see you on Thursday. Stay ruthless.